Well, welcome again to Advice for Grad Students. I'm Phil Hahn. I'm an MIT alum from 2010. I'm at the U.S. Naval War College. I'll give a disclaimer that these are my own views, as well as my guest today is Aidan Milliff, who is a postdoc fellow at Stanford and probably one of our most recent PhDs. Congratulations, Aidan.
Thanks, Phil.
All right. And the topic today is balance of life. And so for the most recent MIT PhD from the Security Studies program, Aidan, why did you pick this topic to discuss of all the list of topics I provided?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let me start by saying thanks for doing this, Phil. It will be nice for grad students not to have to go ferret out all this advice themselves. I picked this topic because I saw it as a great soapbox to climb on. So I've taken balance in life a little more seriously over the course of grad school, and I wanted to take this opportunity to encourage other people to think about it earlier than I really started prioritizing it myself. Okay.
Well, what advice do you have to a first or second year grad student who is completely overwhelmed with the coursework that they're involved in and thinks that there's no way in the world they'll get through the next 5 or 6 years?
Sure, yeah. So I think there are kind of two phases, and the balance problems are really different in the two phases. As a first and second year, balance is how do you keep your head above water while you're doing a bunch of different stuff, studying for generals, passing your classes. And then after that, you confront a situation where you have a lot of time, a lot to do, but basically no structure. And achieving balance then, years 3 through completion, is a really different puzzle. So starting with the first and the second year, I think the biggest thing you can do is actually kind of try and set boundaries on the time that you give yourself for doing working classes and try to become efficient within those boundaries. I found that problem sets especially, but also reading, will take about as much time as you budget for them. But you need to think about two other things in addition to that. One, you need to preserve time to invest in kind of longer term outcomes and do professional development things that aren't necessarily related to your next class meeting. And two, you need to make sure that you're not burning yourself out before you really get started on the research part of grad school. One thing I did, a very concrete piece of advice that relates to problem sets, but I think is also useful for reading-based seminar classes, is don't start your work too early. By the time I got into kind of my second year and the problem sets were getting a little longer, one thing that I and my problem set working group did is if problem sets were due on Wednesday, we just didn't start them until Sunday. Because if you start them on Wednesday, then you'll spend the whole week doing them. But if you start them a little late, you'll crush it into the time that you give them. And I think the same goes for readings. Giving yourself a deadline can make you a little more efficient and give you more time for other things.
Oh, well, very interesting. Using procrastination as a means to preserve time. I'm not one of those, but I do see the value of setting boundaries on the time. Okay, so you've given some insight on the coursework, setting boundaries. What about the other aspects of balance of life? What have you learned?
Yeah, okay, two things here. I'll leave aside the years 3 through completion stuff for a second. Two things I've learned about balance. One is that it's important not to think of taking breaks as wasting time. It's important to think of taking breaks as investing time in future performance. I really think that quality lifetime, that's being with family, that's pursuing your hobbies, serving the community outside of your professional capacity, it actually makes your work a lot better in the long run because you show up with more energy, more perspective, and really more stamina. So I think that it's important to think about taking good quality breaks and exercising other parts of your brain as an investment in your performance at work. And I always talk about grad school as work, which is another maybe life balance thing.
Okay, all right. Well, those are some a good piece of advice for while you're in coursework. I got a sense you have some more advice for afterwards, after the dreaded general exams.
Right. Yeah. After exams, as I said a little bit earlier, the problem totally changes. You go from a bunch of short duration, intense assignments to more or less one very long duration assignment, and you kind of have to pace yourself in order to complete it on time, again, without completely depleting your own stamina and enthusiasm. There are different things that work for different people throughout this. I think some people really succeed by, like working 60-hour weeks on deadline and then 20-hour weeks when there's no deadline. But what I found for me is that treating it like a job, treating it like a routine where you sit down at your computer at one time every day and you sign off for the evening at the same time every evening, that really helped me a lot. I think the broader advice is basically don't assume that the flexibility of grad school means that you don't need to structure your life somehow. You can take advantage of the flexibility without, without giving yourself no structure. And so the background of all this is that I'm trying to structure my work so that I can get it done, get good quality work done in a limited number of hours every week. Because if you don't try and limit the number of hours you spend on work, then it's going to be hard to carve out time for things that you enjoy doing outside of work. One thing that's really helped me there is actually measuring everything I do. And that sounds a little like, hyper optimizy, but I track the time that I spend on work tasks. And that does two things for me. One, I can look at my time log at the end of a day or the end of a week and say, I may not feel like I got much done, but I put in the effort. And that gives me the permission to take a break. And the other thing is that you learn over time how much effort and how much time different tasks take. And you can start to build yourself a more efficient schedule once you learn how long it takes you to prep for a seminar, once you learn how long it takes you to do a piece of analysis or something like that. And
okay.
If you plan, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. So if you plan around these different categories, then you kind of avoid this problem where you show up at work in the morning and you say, oh, what am I going to do today? If you know what you're going to do, then you can be a lot more efficient with your time, and that really contributes to balance. And kind of what you want to do, in my opinion, is maximize the amount of time you spend doing valuable work, maximize the amount of time you spend, on other facets of your life and recharging yourself, and then be really ruthless about these kind of tasks that are at work or paraprofessional, but aren't helping you achieve your goals in the long term. And
okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I was going to. We don't have that much more time, but you've talked really well about structuring like a daily routine, maybe a weekly routine, but the graduate school life does go in a cycle. So did you see a change that occurred even after post generals? At what time there was more time to focus on work, more time was available for other things?
Yeah. So the way that it seemed to me is that the beginnings and ends of semesters are times where your calendar will really fill up, and you have to be, to the extent that you're able to, ready to devote a lot of time to work. The trick for me has always been to structure like the major productive efforts of my own research on times other than that. So, making sure that, I can get all of the professional obligations done, not skimp on investing in communities. Like SSP is a really good community to invest in, but then, try and plan major research efforts or weeks where I kind of block my time off and try to get research done in those lulls in the semester. And if you think about blocking like that in advance, then you can also use that same strategy to do things like block off vacation. Like I'm talking to Phil this week, and then next week I'm going to drive 8 hours away from my computer and probably not respond to anyone's email.
Excellent. Any final last words? Because we're coming to the close of this excellent advice.
I'll just say a couple of tools that I really like using to try and keep track of my time and make some space for non-work things. One is a book called Deep Work by a computer science professor at Georgetown called Cal Newport. Really cool book. And the other is a time tracking tool called Rescue Time. And I highly recommend those. And there are tons of competitors to both that book and that app, but I like it both.
Okay, well, Aidan, thank you so much for sharing your advice for balance of life, for advice to grad students. Have a good one.
Thanks, Phil.